So you can go to that person and say, hey, um, I don't know if you did that on purpose, but it really bothered and really affected. What happens, and just talking about depression or talking about sadness, is when we don't say things, we get used to not saying things. And we call that stuffing. So you stuff things and you hold them inside. And what happens is when you do that for a long period of time, it starts to eat away at you. And so it's good if you feel like someone wronged you or someone hurt you to tell someone. If you could tell that person directly, then you definitely want to do that. You don't want to get in a habit of not expressing your feelings because as you get older, it will be harder to speak up for yourself and harder to defend yourself and harder to express yourself when you're not feeling well. And, and if you are not comfortable expressing yourself directly, then you talk to an adult or somebody who could stand by your side, an older sibling, and share with them what you're feeling and maybe allow you to speak your mind. Not to say that person was being mean or anything, but you still want to be able, you want to learn and you want to put in good practice how to speak up for yourself. Okay? If you could go to the next slide, please. Anxiety. Um, Anxiety is the nervousness or the worry or the anxiousness you feel about something that could happen, something that did happen, or um, negative thoughts. Like on here, it says people laughing at me and think I'm dumb, or I feel like I'm going to make a mistake. Um, Feeling like you'll be abandoned. My mother is not, she's not going to pick me up from school. Or someone, my caregiver somebody's going to get hurt or pass away, or you won't do well in school. So anxiety typically causes you to worry about things that are beyond your control. Like we were talking about in that circle on the previous slides, when you're focusing on the things that are outside of the circle, it can cause anxiety. Um, there are things that we can't control. And those things often make us feel worried or anxious, or we feel like, oh my God, I'm going to explode. I can't do this, or I can't do well on the test. Has anyone on here felt anxious about anything? Have you ever felt worried about something that you could not control? Anyone? No? Okay. That's good. I love it. Oh, yes. Okay. Would you mind sharing? You could type it in. What is something that made you feel anxious?
I can also
Well,
put my input as well. I talked to
okay.
Alicia
Please.
while preparing for these slides. I tend to have bad social anxiety. I tend to overthink of how people will interpret how I act, being like, "Oh, is she weird? Oh, why is she like this and that?" Like, I tend to have bad overthinking thoughts. But despite it all, you always gotta find the good in things. Like, hey, even if it doesn't go well, there's always a next time. You can always make a better impression of yourself. Like, you could just always try to improve upon it and not think so negatively about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anaya. And then the young person on the iPad said failing a test. And believe me, I know what that feels like. I will share a personal story about failing a test. I, it's actually how I ended up becoming a counselor. I was in college and I failed more than a test. I failed an entire class. And I was what I was preparing to be a doctor. I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. So I was taking a class and it's called genetics. It's a class in biology. And because I was a pre-med student, pre-medical, thought I wanted to go to medical school. And I was so worried about this class. And I studied, I met with the professor, I did all these things, and I still ended up failing the class. But I'm going to tell you something that came out of that failure. It wasn't, so I felt really horrible because I never really failed anything, but it made me rethink what I really wanted to do with myself. Because then I was thinking, well, will I really get into medical school? And I failed a whole course that I have to retake. But what I did is I chose to pray. And I asked God, I said, well, what is my real path? Am I really supposed to be like trying to go to medical school, or is there something else for me? And in that moment, it took maybe about a week or two. I was still doing what I got to do, going to class, but I started remembering things from when I was younger. And when I was in high school, I had a group of friends and we had all these nicknames for each other. And I had forgot. This is like my second year of college, so I wasn't really thinking about the things that happened in high school anymore. But my friends had a nickname for me, and their nickname for me was counselor. And we all had like nicknames based on our personality. And I realized that I was pursuing a career path that wasn't in line with who I really was. And essentially, who I was a counselor. And I didn't feel so bad about the anxiety and the worry because actually failing this class allowed me to sit back and breathe and take a moment, focus on what I can control. And what I can control is this my path? And instead, I switched and I changed to psychology, and the rest is history. And I'm a counselor. I've been a counselor for 19 years, and I have no regrets about the choice that I made. So, a situation that started off really bad and caused me all this anxiety really turned out to be something that worked out for my good. So, just want you to keep that in mind. Sometimes things happen. Sometimes things happen and uh, make you anxious, and but things always tend to work themselves out. And so the things that we're worried about so much, eventually they pass. And I want you to keep that in mind. If you could go to the next slide, please. So our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings are all connected. What I think causes me to feel a certain way, and it causes me to behave a certain way. And this is a cognitive behavioral theory, and I am what's called a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I believe if I think a thing, then I will feel a thing, and that causes me to behave a certain way. And if I feel a certain thing, it causes me to think a certain way. So sometimes this pathway gets a little jumbled up. And we have to, if we could fix one thing, then we could fix all of them. So if I say, for instance, if it's a rainy day, some people look at rainy days like they're really horrible. It's cold, rainy, wet, can't go outside. So that's one way to think about it. So if I think that way, that's my thought. If you look at the top of the triangle, then I start to feel like, okay, it's really horrible. And then my behavior, I might sit in the house and sulk and wish I could do other things instead of saying, well, okay, it's a rainy day. I can change my thought. That's what I'm in control of. So it's a rainy day, but maybe I could stay in the house and clean my room that I've been avoiding cleaning. So then I start to feel good. And so that negative thought about this rainy day now is a positive one because I change it and I say, well, it's not so bad if I get to sit in the house. Maybe I get to watch some things that I hadn't had time to watch before. And then my feelings will change about it. Now I'm thinking, okay, the rain isn't so bad because there are some things that I can do, and that changes my behavior. Um, And so let me ask you, any of you, have you ever had something bad happen and you were able to turn it into something good? Anyone? Anyone? I'm one of those presenters. I don't like to do all the talking. So if you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear it. No? No worries. If you could move to the next slide, please. Uh, so this is a screen that we use when people have gone through some really heavy things. And this is just an example. Um, you can go to the next slide. We're not going to stay on there. You could go to the next slide. So trauma, wanted to talk about that. Uh, Trauma is something when you have been when you've seen something or typically something that you've seen or heard that caused you a lot of fear, that makes you want to avoid what happened, or causes you to flee if you see something similar to that. That's trauma. So trauma is caused by a lot of different things. For some people, it may be losing someone. For someone else, it could be seeing something bad that happened, like a car accident. And if, let's say, if it's a car accident, um, and you saw it happen, that could cause trauma and could make you fearful of certain things. But you can also be traumatized by, breaking your arm or breaking a limb, something that happens to you, or even having a bad dream sometimes can cause trauma and make you afraid to go to sleep. Uh, I just wanted to introduce that concept so you understood what that is. If you're ever exposed to anything that makes you uncomfortable, anything, any person, anyone, you want to say something to somebody. That's the common theme that I want you, one of the major things I want you to get with from this presentation. None of these things are normal for children. Sadness, anxiety, and or trauma. I want you to be able to say, this doesn't feel good to me. And you need to tell someone, you need to talk to an adult, you need to tell them that something is making you sad, or something is making you fearful, or something is making you anxious. You never want to try to take care of it on your own. If there is someone there you can talk to, someone that you trust, an adult that you trust, you always want to go to that person and let them know. You want to get in the habit of speaking up for yourself and not holding things in. You could go to the next slide. If you experience trauma, uh, when things go wrong, you ask yourself, what happened? What did you think when it first happened? What have you been thinking since it happened? And who are the people affected and how? What do you think needs to happen in order to make things right? And like I was saying, you want to be able to talk to somebody whom you trust. If someone has been hurt, what did you feel when you realized it happened? What impact has the incident had on you and others? So you're asking yourself these questions. What has been the hardest thing for you since this bad thing happened? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? Uh, Psalm 73:26 says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. So there are times that maybe you don't feel like you can speak up, or you're not strong enough, or you're sad, but you want to remember that you always have God and you can always pray. Uh, our skin, our bodies and our minds, they feel things and we think things. But God is bigger than it all. So it's one thing I want you guys to remember. If you could go to the next slide, please. The next one. Those are some resources, but wanted to share this. Taking care of yourself is important. So you are equipped to help yourself and your family when you're going through things. Your physical health, you want to take care of your body. We only get one, and we want it to be treated well. So you got to eat well, drink plenty of water, make sure you're sleeping, exercise, take deep breaths, stretch sometimes just sitting in your seat and stretching your arms out feels really good sometimes just to move around. Avoid risky behaviors. Don't do things that you know you shouldn't do. Spend some time outside, walking around, enjoying the trees like I have behind me. For your mental health, you want to have healthy routines. So you get up, you eat your breakfast, you brush your teeth, you wash your face, you put on clothes, you greet the people around you in your house. When you walk into a room with friends, you say hi. Um, when you walk into your classroom, speak to your teacher. Those are healthy routines. Focus on things that you can control. Use technology to maintain social connections, but you also want to limit technology if it's too much for you. Focus on your current thoughts, things that you're grateful for. Lean on your personal beliefs and faith for support, things that make you feel good. Self-compassion, do the best that you can and give yourself grace. That's actually my theme for this year for all of my clients. Give yourself grace. So, a lot of times we're hard on ourselves, and we're harder on ourselves more than anybody else is hard on us. So, that's whether or not you're playing a sport, whether or not you're trying to do well in class. We always put a lot of pressure on us. And sometimes we don't get it all right. Sometimes we don't do everything right. And that's what grace means, to say, you know what, I messed up, but I'm okay. I'm human. But you also want to do that with other people. Like the person who said, um, you were tripped. And I keep bringing that up because it resonates with me in a lot of different ways. But to have grace, you believe that person didn't do it on purpose. So that means you forgive. And that's showing grace and that's showing compassion to other people. So you definitely want to be able to do that. And it helps with your own mental health. You actually feel better letting people off the hook than holding on to things and making and punishing people for doing things that they shouldn't do. You could go to the next slide. Um, so this is a technique, and we could do this rather than the breathing exercise I had, even though my laptop is functioning properly now and I'm on it. Um, this technique is called grounding, and it's a technique for anxiety and stress. It's very, very common and very easy to do. So what you do when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling like really worried, you want to use your five senses. So what you're doing is counting down five, four, three, two, and then one. So the first thing is five things you can see. And this is when you're like really feeling overwhelmed. So the example here says I could see my hands, I could see the sky. Can someone share maybe one or two things that they can see around them right now? And if the one on the iPad, you can type it in too. What? Tell me something that you see. I can see your face. I can see your faces. Some. I could see the screen. Anyone? That's okay. Lights. Okay. You could see light. That's good. So when you're feeling anxious, you start at five. So you take five things that you can see and you sit quietly and you just look around. I have a painting above my head. I have a window. I've got a mirror. You list five things. Then you move to four. Four things that you can physically feel. And so you go, four things. I can feel a bottle of water. I can feel a pen. And so what you want to do with this exercise, you actually want to pick the things up because what we're doing is tricking our mind into not focusing on what's making us anxious. And we're distracting our brain and say, hey, focus on those five things you can see. Focus on those four things that you can actually touch. My phone. I have a pair of scissors. Then three things that you can hear. What do you hear? When you get still, oftentimes you hear things that you didn't hear before. You might hear yourself breathing. I could hear the air conditioning running in my office. I have what's called uh, it minimizes sound so people can't hear me outside of my office door. I could hear that. So three things that you can hear. Then you focus on two things that you can smell. There's always something around you. There's always a scent, even if it feels like there isn't one. So you might go, what does my skin smell like? It might smell like lotion, might smell like perfume. So then you do two things that you can smell. And then one thing you can taste. And maybe you could taste your breakfast from this morning on your tongue. Or you could pick up a piece of candy or something or a piece of gum and put that in your mouth. And that allows you to have something. So by the time you count back, if you're feeling really overwhelmed, by the time you go through five things you can see, four things you can feel, three things you can hear, two things you can smell, and one thing you can taste, you will probably forget what was overwhelming you and making you feel so anxious. And maybe you won't forget it, but it won't be so heavy on you anymore. So I want that to be something that you take away with you. It's very easy to remember. Five, four, three, two, one. And use your senses. And you could switch the order. Whatever you need to help you. You might be eating and start to get anxious. And maybe there's five things you could taste and only one thing you can see. But just remember five, four, three, two, one. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, and the next one. Okay, and that's it for today. I wanted to thank you all. Thank you for those who were able to participate and engage. I love that. I don't like to be the only one talking. And I appreciate your time and attention. And I apologize earlier for my laptop. I was praying it wouldn't do that. And now it's fine. But such is life. I don't allow things like that to get me down. And if nothing else you take away, even use what happened to me as an example for you in your life. Sometimes things happen that you don't expect. And it doesn't mean it has to ruin your day. It might jar you for a second, but there's always an upside. Anaya had my back. She was right there. She got the slides up. She helped me. And and if she didn't, we still would have figured it out. And so when life happens, don't melt. Everything will be okay. And um, I like that. Thank you, Sydney. Anaya has some questions for you all. Anaya, you could go on and do your part.
Yeah.
And
hmm
go ahead.
So for everyone, you can either say this out loud or type it in the chat. And I would like you guys to answer these three questions. One, if you ever had mental health struggles, what things or coping mechanisms helped you out to get out of that dark place? Two, if you see a loved one in need of help, how would you handle things or how would you give them your support? And lastly, was there anything from this presentation that stood out to you specifically?
Okay. So need you to participate. I heard there's a prize. But feel free, type in the chat or unmute yourself and let's hear it.
So we can have a little
I know
start
I can.
in my personal thoughts as well.
Okay.
So for the first one, like I mentioned earlier, one of the main mechanisms that helps me out is drawing. I'm more specifically a digital artist, so I love drawing on my iPad all day, and it's really relaxing for me. Some people
Okay.
think like, oh, is it art a lot to focus on? Yeah, but it keeps you distracted, allows you to use your creativity, it gives you other outlets.
Thank you. Thank you, Anaya. So art is one way that helps, and that's called a coping mechanism. That's what you do to help you out of a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
And Chelsea wrote in the chat, sleeping
I
helps her.
honestly agree. But at the same time, you don't want to sleep your problems away on the daily.
No, you definitely don't want to do that.
I think using the five senses that you mentioned. I know I came on late, but that's really I really like that. I can use that with my students that I work with, special education students. So I came in right on time. I really like that one.
Oh, awesome.
So
Awesome.
thank you for
Yes.
that. Will we receive a copy of this?
I believe Miss Christella, she has that and she could provide that. She does have my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
That's
maybe I can
really
provide
good.
to her specifically the grounding and she could share that with you. Absolutely. May I ask who who's speaking?
That's Aunt Bonnie.
Okay. I want to be sure she gets that. Um, has
Just to,
any
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
just to add, highly favored is my other aunt. um, when in regards to question number one, when I was 19 years old, I went through some mental health struggles, and the coping mechanisms that I had was literally my family. You know, my mother, my father, my aunts,
Yeah,
everybody was coming to see me, checking on me, seeing how I was doing, and they still continue to do that to this day. My pastor and his wife, and your friends and family being that support system, it really
hmm
means a lot because it lets you know that you're not going through this by yourself and you have people
absolutely.
that care about you and your existence. It makes a big difference than trying to feel like you're fighting everything alone.
Absolutely. So leaning on others. That's good. Um, in the chat, we have, what's that? Samuel. So Chelsea said sleeping. CJ said praying, praying and talking to my family, uh, making that family member feel loved and helping them to open up so we can find a resolution. Chelsea says, ask them if anything is bothering them. So this is for question number two. If anything is bothering them, if they are willing to open up and see what can be done to help. And Darlene says singing as a coping mechanism, which is really some. Whether or not you have a great voice or not. So That's good. Thank you. Anybody else wanted to share any takeaways from today? Or how would you help a person in need? Or if anyone else has gone through any mental health struggles? I I do want to say this. I appreciate you, sir, sharing. We, the move right now is for mental health to become a regular part of discussion, just like somebody sharing they may be diabetic or they might have high blood pressure or asthma, which is very common. And so I appreciate people sharing their struggles because that helps others get free. So being able to say something that you've gone through and see how you came out is always a good way to help others. So in question number 2, it says, if you see a loved one in need or help, how would you handle things? I would suggest in answering that question, if you do that in your personal life, share what you've been through. Uh, People connect to people a lot easier if they feel like they've been through something similar, or when they see, you know what, you're human too. Sometimes it's just about humanizing yourself. Some people, we put others on a pedestal and we think, their poop doesn't stink like everybody else's. But it's always good to humanize yourself when you're trying to be there for other people. Uh, and just to keep talking. Anaya, I appreciate you sharing because you have dealt with things yourself. Being able to talk about it and share is another way to take the light out of the dark place and shine the light where the light needs to be. You take the power away from negative things when you talk about them, when you deal with them. So I appreciate that. I love hearing from you all. Thank you for sharing. And that's all I have for today. Did you